So let's dig deeper now into some of the stories that the media is grappling with today. So if we have a look at some of the reaction to our top story, Gulf News is looking at this in a lot of detail, as are many global front pages. Its headline reads, "Trump crosses the red line after breaking from decades of US and international policy by recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital." Pope Francis expressing deep concern over the situation. Elsewhere, Russian news agency TASS looks at Vladimir Putin announcing his bid for next year's presidential race, putting him on course for 24 years in power. His re-election campaign will be unrolling next February when the Winter Olympics get underway, with, of course, as you've been hearing, the Russian team banned by the IOC. Turning to the German online publication Deutsche Welle, this story trending on their site. German pilots refuse to carry out deportations. It's been revealed that 222 asylum seekers have had their deportations stopped by pilots who are not wanting to take the refugees back to Afghanistan, where violence is still rife. At the same time, refugees are appealing their deportation orders in record numbers, and they are winning. Financial Times, on its front page, it says the Irish Premier's raised the prospect of Brexit divorce talks stretching into the new year. It comes after Theresa May struggled to get a deal with Northern Irish unionists on Wednesday. And finally, Time magazine. This is a story that we were discussing yesterday. It's been announced, of course, Time's Person of the Year. It's actually more than one person, isn't it? It's those who broke their silence, the silence breakers, the women and men who've spoken out about sexual abuse and harassment. So the Me Too hashtag movement has been a big movement this year. Well, let's get cracking. As you saw earlier, we've got Geraint with us, Geraint Anderson, writer and former banker. Geraint, let's begin with the very controversial and sensitive issue of what President Trump said he would do. He did deliver as far as his electorate are concerned. Gulf News says Trump crosses the red line.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that the principal motivation Trump has here, as in other policy decisions, is to say to the world, I'm going to do this, I don't care about your opinion, a bit like sort of Millwall used to chant, everyone who hates us and we don't care. He did have an election promise to do this, so suggests he was motivated by the pro-Israeli lobby. But really, why would you throw fuel on the fire in this sense? It just seems to be condemned by everyone, including the Pope, the international community. I don't really understand how you can combine that, doing this, and also the stated aim of sorting out the Middle East peace process.
I mean, just to sort of clarify, I mean, the Pope's not, he would say he's deeply concerned, he's not condemned the move as such, Pope Francis, but of course much reaction from around the world, not just in the Middle East, and we've got the UN Security Council meeting that's been called at the end of the week to sort of discuss this by 6 members of the UN. It's an interesting scenario, as you say. What's his motivation? It's very much, is it America first, but America very much alone when it comes to international politics.
He seems to like that. You know, he's trying to be the strong man. He's trying to tell everyone that he's going to do what he's going to deliver on his election promises. But I still, for the life of me, cannot work out how this is going to improve the potential for the peace process. Because there was just a glimmer of hope, because Saudi Arabia, in its long-running geopolitical battle with Iran, was apparently putting pressure on Palestine to talk with Israel. And so there were these glimmers of hope, but that now is all off the table. And, you know, the possibility of another intifada, I suppose, is increased subsequently. So not good news for people in Jerusalem, not good news for world peace.
Some might say in Jerusalem, some in Jerusalem will say this is great news for us. I mean, it just depends on your, what side of the argument you're on. But let's have a look at what they're discussing in Russia. The Russian news agency TASS talking about the fact that President Putin announcing his bid for the 2018 Russian presidential race. No shock or surprise as far as that news is concerned, but it's quite a thought to think that he'd be in power for something like 24 years if he were to win. Yeah,
I mean, he would be the longest-running leader of Russia, since Stalin. And I suppose the comparisons might go a little bit further with him and Stalin, because what we all assumed in the West was that when you kind of got capitalism and free market economics and so forth. Hand in hand with that went liberalism and democracy and so forth. But actually, when you don't have a massive democratic tradition, as in Russia, you can get, and in China, you can get this strange dual passageway of liberal capitalist economics, but strong men who are being very undemocratic. And clearly, they're winning it to some extent at the moment, which is the tragic thing. And he's going to win, apparently, very easily. There's a massive majority. He's got no serious opposition. And
well, there are those like the likes of Alexei Navalny and various others who've tried to provide some kind of opposition. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, famously as well, who was put behind bars for quite some time. I mean, it will be interesting to see how this all plays out next year in February, when the election does begin. But as you say, it's not a democracy as we know it. It's a very different.
I mean, some would call it a kleptocracy.
Very different being.
I've seen estimates that Bill Gates is not actually the richest man in the world. It's actually Vladimir Putin, worth over $200 billion.
Quite interesting, though, to see that sort of, as you mentioned, this sort of the strong leadership sort of thought process. We've got President Trump, President Putin, and President Xi as well. It's an interesting scenario playing out in world politics. Let's now move on.
And a scary one too.
Indeed. Let's now move on to this story, which is really, really interesting, in Deutsche Welle, the online news organisation. German pilots refuse to carry out deportations. This is something that was new to me this morning, I have to say, when I saw this story. Quite incredible how pilots are actually taking action where they feel deportations shouldn't happen, where refugees are being sent back to very dangerous situations. Yeah,
well, I'm not entirely certain about the motivation, because the main reason a pilot can prevent a plane from flying, and I have to say I only saw this story this morning too, appears to be that the plane might be in danger itself. Now, they could be using that as an excuse.
Security on the aircraft.
On the aircraft, as opposed to nice liberal-minded pilots deciding that they don't want to take these 222 asylum seekers back to Afghanistan because they fear for their safety. So I do need to do a little bit more research on this programme, on this particular story, before I say that all these lovely Lufthansa pilots are very liberal-minded folk.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, we don't know what all their the individual motivations are, but it's a very interesting situation. And in Germany, of course, it's extremely politically sensitive right now, because Angela Merkel is trying to sort of pin down a coalition government, which is taking quite a long time after an election that brought this issue to light, this issue of all those people in Germany who are trying to start a new life there. The million or so. It was always going to be the
central issue. I think, as you say, about 1 million people were let in from the Middle East and so forth. I think of those refugees who have appealed to go back, about 50% have actually been had their cases put in their favour. So it's quite interesting that.
Now, Geraint, let's get your take on how the Brexit negotiations are going. This week is a critical week, and Theresa May has got her work cut out this week, that's for sure. Now, we're hearing from the Prime Minister of Ireland, Leo Varadkar, that perhaps a deal is imminent. But, of course, Arlene Foster, the head of the DUP, has quite a different take on things.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on how this week's been progressing?
Oh, it's just a farce and an embarrassment, and just,
Is it that, or is it just extremely difficult for her to sort of try and, not please everybody, but try and find a deal that works for those within her own cabinet, the head of the DUP and the leader of Ireland?
I don't think those are mutually exclusive thoughts. I think it's a farce and an embarrassment precisely because she has so many balls in the air that she's trying to juggle. There are these 10 MPs in the DUP who are essentially dictating events. And that is the best example I've ever seen of the tail wagging the dog. And
just really quickly, time's short as ever, which is a shame, but Time Person of the Year, the Silence Breakers, several women and men named. There was other nominations, like President Trump, for example. Do you think they picked the right one?
I do, actually, because I think there has been, this is a watershed moment in gender politics. I think that the days of, in the West certainly, of powerful men abusing that position, especially now that we've got social media and camera phones and people recording conversations, I think any bloke in a position of power who tries to use that to get sexual favours would now think really twice about that.
All right. Thank you, Geraint, for coming in. Appreciate your company on